Oh, good. You're here. I'm so glad, because today we're talking about how much of Project 2025 can be directly translated into Donald Trump's executive orders. Now, on the first day of Donald Trump's second term alone, an astonishing amount of executive orders, memoranda, and proclamations were made that truly stunned the world. But for anybody who read the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, a conservative roadmap to a fascist future, the orders sounded a bit familiar. Almost as if they were exactly the same. In fact, despite claiming that he knew nothing about Project 2025, Trump is purported to have enacted over 2/3 of its agenda on day one alone. So which actions were his and which were Project 2025's? Some of these may actually surprise you, and one of them shocked the straight hell out of me. Buckle up, because we're headed back to Project 2025. Pop quiz. Where does the following quote come from? Congress should set policy, not presidents through pen and phone executive orders, and not agencies through regulations and guidance. Any guesses? Well, it was written by Lindsay M. Burke on page 323 of none other than Project 2025. It happens to be the one thing in Project 2025 that I wish were coming true during the first 10 days of Trump's term. For those who don't know, or maybe need a refresher, back in April of 2023, the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, created a roadmap for a more conservative America, and it was meant to completely remodel the government in a transformative and sometimes disturbing way. As Nick Popleep writes for Time, the agenda included aggressive deregulation, curbs on immigration, challenges to civil rights protections, and substantial reductions of the federal workforce, all with the aim of reducing the size and scope of government while reasserting executive authority. This is Project 2025, a behemoth 922-page document with multiple authors, many of whom are either in Trump's administration now or are quite simply waiting confirmations. It was written by people like Russ Vought, who was just confirmed to the Office of Management and Budget. He is one of the primary architects of Project 2025. As one ABC Press report put it, he was also deeply involved in drafting 2025's playbook for the first 180 days of a new Trump administration. Fun fact, he was also the man who created Schedule F in Trump's first term. This was a failed attempt to reclassify every single federal employee as at will, meaning that Trump could fire them for any reason. Other authors of Project 2025 include Stephen Miller, who is now Trump's Deputy Chief of Staff, Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, Brendan Carr, the nominee for FCC chair, and Tom Homan, the border czar. Another fun fact, Time magazine found that on day one of his presidency, nearly 2/3 of Trump's presidential actions either mirrored or partially mirrored Project 2025's 900 pages. I think you're going to figure out pretty quickly which of the following executive orders were influenced by which of these sycophants. Because today, I'm going to do something a little different. We're going to look through the pages of Project 2025 with you side by side, doing comparisons to P2025 and the many presidential actions that Donald Trump has taken on his first day alone in office. Because trust me when I say this next part, Time magazine is softening the blow by saying it mirrors or partially mirrors Project 2025. Donald Trump is quite literally trying to bring almost all of Project 2025 to life, and he's doing it in disturbing and inhumane ways. But first, hello, my name is V, and this is my YouTube channel where I dive deep under the desk to find the crumpled paper trails of long-forgotten history, while also gently reminding you that when it seems like everything sucks, there is often a little light at the end of the tunnel. So make sure you like and subscribe, because today we're talking about the first days of Project 2025, a topic so popular that when we covered it on Substack, it tripled our subscriber base in just one day. So if you're here from Substack, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us for the ride and for all of your support. Some of this is going to be a little redundant to you because, again, we covered it on Substack, but it's always fun to hear it twice, and this time you get to hear me kind of read it aloud to you. So let me tell you something. If you really want to know what kind of demons we're dealing with here, let me do something most content creators won't tell you to do, and that is pause this video, click on the link in the description labeled P2025 PDF, and do a word search for the word woke. I'll wait. As an official roadmap for the next conservative president, a slang term like woke couldn't possibly just appear there, right? I mean, there's still some decorum in politics, isn't there? For those of you who didn't click away, 35 times, and 3 of those times refer to Democrats as taking part in something called the Great Awakening. This is all on page 1. The people we're dealing with here are not well, and they're now in charge of the US government. And let me give you another example before we begin. From the foreword on page 4 under Project 2025's first promise, which is titled, "Restore the American Family as the Centerpiece of American Life and Protect Our Children," quote, "The next conservative president must make the institutions of American civil society hard targets for woke culture warriors. This starts with deleting terms about sexual orientation and gender identity, deleting terms about diversity, equity, and inclusion, deleting terms that have anything to do with gender, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, the word abortion, reproductive health, reproductive rights, pretty much any term that they could use to try and deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights. They want it out. They want it out of all federal legislation, every website, everywhere, okay? And then in the very next line of the foreword, they state that pornography is manifested as the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children. They directly call purveyors of transgender ideology child predators and misogynistic exploiters of women. And they claim that these people need to be imprisoned and register as sex offenders. On multiple occasions, Donald Jamboree Trump famously said and repeated a variation of the phrase, "I have nothing to do with Project 2025.
I have nothing to do with Project 2025. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it."
But since he's famously a man of his word, everybody believed him, right? And the video ends here. Good night. No, of course, that's not really the reality we live in. Trump is such a profound liar that the Washington Post once found on average he told nearly 147 lies per day. 147 lies per day. That's 30,573 lies over the course of his first 4 years in office. Nobody believed him then. And when he almost immediately went against his own word on January 20th, 2025, nobody was surprised then either. But wait till you get a load of these executive orders. As a quick note before we begin, for the sake of redundancy, we're going to skip over some of Trump's executive orders in which he acted simply to gut actions taken by Joe Biden, something we called on the Substack as the "Fuck You Joe" orders. We're not going to talk about those in this episode, but you can read about those on the Substack. He actually rolled back about 78 executive orders and memorandums done by the Biden administration, and almost all of those executive orders were things that had to do with DEI, climate crisis, or COVID-19, okay? And Trump is accusing the Biden administration of promoting deeply unpopular, inflationary, illegal, and radical practices within every agency and office of the federal government. So he took 78 Biden orders that really helped people out and revoked them. And that is actually part of the ethos in Project 2025 also, right? Was to revoke everything that the Biden administration had done as a mission-critical project. Now, getting into his executive orders, the thing that's more interesting than what he's doing is how the language in the executive orders mirror the document from Project 2025 itself. Like, it's not even trying to hide it. You may also be surprised that protecting the meaning and value of American citizenship, the very controversial order he signed that redefines birthright citizenship, is actually not in Project 2025. Even if it was a pet project of the Heritage Foundation, it's not actually found in those 922 pages, okay? You may also be surprised to find out that his executive order declaring a national energy emergency is also not in Project 2025, although many, many other fossil fuel related things are. Text, there are more references to the Great Awakening in Project 2025 than there are hands on this comparison video, okay? So if you think I missed anything, please point it out in the comments below because we would absolutely love to see any other comparisons that you're finding, okay? It's gonna take lots of eyes for us to fully encapsulate like how much these have mirrored each other. And if you want me to cover other parts of Project 2025 as they come true, let us know, okay? Because again, this is a collaboration. We're just going with what he did on day one right now. So before we dive into those individual orders, it should be known up front that many of the executive orders are embodied quite perfectly by one chapter in Project 2025 known as the General Welfare. The chapter purportedly is about reworking the Department of Health and Human Services. But on page 283 alone, we see lines like, the next secretary should also reverse the Biden administration's focus on LGBTQ equality, subsidizing single motherhood, disincentivizing work, and penalizing marriage, replacing such policies with those encouraging marriage, work, motherhood, fatherhood, and nuclear families. Or The most important thing for the next Attorney General to do is refocus the Department of Justice on its core functions of protecting public safety and defending the rule of law, while restoring its values of independence, impartiality, honesty, integrity, respect, and excellence. Now, on its face, you might agree with that kind of stuff, but just a few pages later, they write, under the next president, the Department of Energy should end the Biden administration's unprovoked war on fossil fuels, restore America's energy independence, oppose eyesore windmills built at taxpayer expense, and respect the right of Americans to buy and drive cars of their own choosing, rather than trying to force them into electric vehicles and eventually out of the driver's seat altogether in favor of self-driving robots. I don't hate the part about eliminating self-driving cars, but let's keep going, because that's the thing about Project 2025 and Trump's orders. They're super inhumane and the possible outcome of a roadmap to fascism. But the paths are comically jagged, and the fact that there are holes everywhere, and you start to agree with some stuff before you start to realize that you've trotted down the path of fascism, or that the end goal for some legislation that seems like should be fine on its face, something like not having autonomous cars, doesn't actually result in something as simple as we just don't want autonomous cars. And it does result in something like, we're going to take over Gaza for their minerals, or so that we can continue to produce fossil fuel cars and oil. Gross. The other thing about the Trump administration is, while they will do some things that are incredibly cruel, they will also do some things that are incredibly stupid. And so the way that these executive orders are written, or even intended to be written from the Heritage Foundation, are being interpreted in a very stupid way by the Trump administration. And those things being at odds are certainly going to cost the American people. Which leads us to our first executive order, restoring freedom of speech and ending federal censorship. This was the order claiming that Joe Biden murdered free speech for Americans online by prioritizing the fight against mis- and disinformation. It asks the Attorney General, who was almost Matt Gaetz, don't forget, to investigate the 4-year Biden term for evidence of murdering free speech. Now, you can think of this as Trump's attempt to make the law sound like a trashy Netflix true crime documentary, but you might be surprised to find that this is the first of our Project 2025 mirrors. It mirrors pages 154 and 155 in a section outlining how to reshape CISA, not the singer, CISA, standing for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. CISA has rapidly expanded its scope into lanes where it does not belong. The most recent and most glaring example being censorship of so-called misinformation and disinformation. Of the utmost urgency is to immediately end CISA's counter mis- and disinformation efforts. The federal government cannot be the arbiter of the truth. CISA began this work because of an alleged Russian misinformation campaign in the 2016 election, which in fact turned out to be a Clinton campaign dirty trick. That's what they say. Later, on page 550 in Gene Hamilton's Department of Justice piece, he makes the demand for Trump to prohibit the FBI from engaging, in general, in activities related to combating the spread of so-called misinformation and disinformation by Americans who are not tied to any plausible criminal activity. The FBI, along with the rest of the government, needs a hard reset on the appropriate scope of its legitimate activities. It must not look to rely on the past decade as precedent or legitimization for continued action in certain spaces. This is especially true with respect to activities that the FBI and the US government writ large claim are efforts to combat misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation. Now, it's right here that we can draw direct parallels between Trump's language and P2025's calling the war on misinformation government censorship, which is absolutely bonkers, okay? It also makes the Trump administration seem incredibly lazy right off the bat. I mean, they didn't even try to disguise this. Similarly, the action ending the weaponization of the federal government had Trump call for the Biden administration to be held accountable for allegedly weaponizing the federal government, and calls the heads of every major government agency to review previous criminal enforcement, civil enforcement, and intelligence conduct that appears politically motivated, and to provide recommendations for holding actors accountable. So again, end the weaponization of the federal government, but we want to hold government officials who went after Trump, let's be for real, accountable in some way. Do you want to know how incredibly lazy the Trump administration is? This order is from the back cover of 2025. Pull it up. Pull it up right now. It's almost identical. Project 2025 is a sweeping plan to end the weaponization of the government against Americans and the values that they care about. Molly Hemingway, editor-in-chief, The Federalist. Now, it's not just Project 2025, it's Project 2025 reviews as well. And the bar is in hell, people. To be fair, on page 43, Russ Voigt writes, "The modern conservative president's task is to limit, control, and direct the executive branch on behalf of the American people. This challenge is created and exacerbated by factors like Congress's decades-long tendency to delegate its lawmaking power to agency bureaucracies, the pervasive notion of expert independence that protects so-called expert authorities from scrutiny, the presumed inability to hold career civil servants accountable for their performance, and the increasing reality that many agencies are not only too big and too powerful, but also increasingly weaponized against the public and a president who is elected by the people and empowered by the Constitution to govern." Y'all remember on TikTok when I was telling you that the president actually wants to be the Speaker of the House? This is that. President Trump is really looking to usurp and take the power of Congress, especially the power of the purse, for himself. And he's laid out the way he will do that through the executive orders in Project 2025, which seeks to create a unitary executive, meaning no more three branches of government. It's all the president and then the people who do his bidding. On page 133, Homeland Security is referred to as weaponized and woke. On page 161, the Office of Intelligence and Analysis is referred to as weaponized. And do you remember our old friend, the General Welfare, the one I told you has an answer for everything? Travel with me to page 285, where it says, if there's another department that has gone off the rails like HHS during the Obama and Biden administrations, it's the once proud Department of Justice. The department's unprecedented politicization and weaponization under Biden and Attorney General Merrick Garland resulted in politically motivated and viewpoint-based prosecutions of political enemies and indifference to the crimes of political allies, and has made the department a threat to the republic. In fact, every government agency seemingly is a weapon and needs to be repurposed. I mean, that's according to P2025 and Trump. It's very funny that the most direct wording available here came from a pull quote that is quite literally something that you would see in like H Bomber Guy plagiarism video of a random creator or something. Speaking of creators, let's talk about return to in-person work. The immediate action where Trump requires all federal employees return to the office without exception. That is in Project 2025. It's on page 651. The remote work expectation has been amplified and formalized within the Biden administration team at VA to the extent that the current secretary, deputy secretary, and their staffs are not in office as a matter of routine presence, while VA staff in Washington, D.C. have limited in-person meetings, relying more frequently on video conference calls. The short-term and long-term effects of this policy on the department are unknown, but generally the policy may be undermining the cohesiveness and competencies of some staff functions and diluting general organizational accountability and responsiveness. I can't speak for government employees, but a study by the U.S. Career Institute in 2024 found that companies save over $10,000 per remote employee on top of savings from not needing to pay for office rent or like supplies and expenses and stuff, even stating that a company with 50 employees could save $500,000 annually just by going remote. Not to mention the fact that like I find I'm a much more productive person when I'm remote. And on an individual level, employees themselves save over $12,000 on average by working remotely. That's on top of expanding their actual savings accounts by not having to buy things like gas or work clothes or lunches out or emotional support coffees. 93% say their physical and mental health improved while working remotely. I mean, sounds like a net positive to everyone except the authors of Project 2025, who Trump basically plagiarized. I mean, I don't think he agrees with this one. He's just an asshole. You know what I mean? Speaking of being an asshole, Trump's regulatory freeze pending review and hiring freeze actions pop up on page 615 in very plain language. Implement a hiring freeze for career officials. A hiring freeze imposes financial discipline on agencies' personnel costs and reduces agency bloat. Quick side story here. In the early 2000s, I worked for a restaurant group that was very well known, and every month we had to fire the bottom 10% of our staff. And one month I was like, what if we don't have a bottom 10% of our staff? And the owner of this restaurant group was like, then it's you. We don't need to do that cutthroat, terrible stuff anymore. The idea that if you are constantly cutting your bottom employees, you're always just like maximizing and getting the best people is quite simply not true. In that case, it was me. I quit that job because that's toxic and we can't live like that. Now, from here on out, we're getting into the much darker executive orders. So pull the blankets up over your head because it's about to get creepy. First up, putting America first in international environmental agreements, aka the executive order where Trump once again pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement, while also taking the extra step of withdrawing the United States from all international climate pacts and cutting off any financial commitments the US had made to any other organizations or countries. Or unleashing American energy, which is yet another FU Biden order with an added FU Earth. This demands a review of the agencies preventing natural gas, coal, hydropower, biofuels, critical minerals, and nuclear energy resources from being mined or refined.
That is why today I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill.
Now, we see that on pages 257 and 258 in the Agency for International Development section of P25. Upon taking office, President Biden issued executive orders to put the climate crisis at the center of U.S. foreign policy and national security and mitigate the devastating inequities that intersect with gender, race, ethnicity, and economic security. USAID subsequently declared itself a climate agency. USAID should cease its war on fossil fuels in the developing world and support the responsible management of oil and gas reserves as the quickest way to end retching poverty and the need for open-ended foreign aid. The next conservative administration should rescind all climate policies from its foreign aid programs, shut down the agency's offices, shut down the agency's programs and directives designed to advance the Paris Climate Agreement, and narrowly limit the funding to traditional climate mitigation efforts. It goes on to say USAID should cease collaborating with and funding progressive foundations, corporations, international institutions, and NGOs that advocate on behalf of climate fanaticism. Now, where do you think Trump got his idea to withdraw the U.S. from the World Health Organization? Did it come from behind that fun little rat he wears on his head? Or maybe he asked Elon, who he should hate today. And Elon was like, who? And Trump was like, Elon, you mad lad, I'm building a wall around that idea. Yeah, who? No, it wasn't either of those, but it was fun to shade them. This comes from Project 2025 on page 191. The manifest failure and corruption of the World Health Organization during the COVID-19 pandemic is an example of the danger that international organizations pose to U.S. citizens and interests. The next administration must end blind support for international organizations. If an international organization is effective and advances American interests, then the United States should support it. If an international organization is ineffective or does not support American interests, the United States should not support it. Who's to say if it's effective or not? I guess Elon. I don't know. No, again, it's Project 2025, guys. Catch up. On page 266, it says, holding the UN, the World Health Organization, and other multilateral organizations accountable, leadership should designate a political appointee to help coordinate cross-agency efforts to hold the U.S. government's multilateral partners, UN and WHO agencies and other international organizations, to a higher level of financial and programmatic accountability. This man does not have one original idea. Not one. The next order we're going to talk about is holding former government officials accountable for election interference and improper disclosure of sensitive governmental information. Why do I think this isn't going to go where all normal people would think it was going to go? Because it's a Trump order. This executive order pulls the plug for security clearances for many of Trump's enemies, including his OG national security advisor, John Bolton. And they're doing that because John Bolton had the balls to write a letter discrediting the Hunter Biden laptop story. Now, there are 51 names in this letter. 2 of them are deceased now, and none of them have security clearances now. Believe it or not, even though this order definitely reads as a petty retaliation against many of Trump's enemies, there is precedence for this in Project 2025. Yes, on pages 212 and 213. Quote, the intelligence community must restore confidence in its political neutrality to rectify the damage done by the actions of former IC leaders and personnel regarding the claims of Trump-Russia collusion following the 2016 election and suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop investigation and media revelations of its existence during the 2020 election. President Barack Obama's CIA director, John Brennan, gravely damaged the CIA by minimizing the Directorate of Operations and exploiting intelligence analysis as a political weapon after he left office. Brennan's role in the letter, signed by 51 former intelligence officers before the 2020 election, is unclear, but in dismissing the Hunter Biden laptop story as Russian disinformation, the CIA was discredited, and the shocking extent of politicization among some former IC officials was revealed. The president should immediately revoke the security clearances of any former directors, deputy directors, or other senior intelligence officials who discuss their work in the press or on social media without prior clearance from the current director. Will never, ever, ever understand or frankly believe anyone who thinks that Hunter Biden's laptop is viable political talking point. Point blank, period. Do you even know what a blind man finds? I can't. We're not going to relitigate the Hunter Biden laptop thing. It was nonsense then, it's nonsense now, and it's also now in an executive order. And finally, this is going to be a deep dive, but it is not completely comprehensive because he's doing new weird stuff every single day. So as of this recording, this is how much of his work is mirroring Project 2025, but we'll have a part 2 to this series, so stay tuned.